Hi, Sandy Watson here from Periscopia. Stigma totally sucks. This tutorial addresses the reasons why the term stigma is so harmful to people living with mental distress and proposes that we stop using the term altogether and instead that we address the real issue, which is the act of discrimination. I remember sitting in the waiting room of a community mental health centre and there was a big poster on the wall about stigma. I kept staring at it because it made me feel uncomfortable for a reason that I couldn't fathom at the time. It said, "Stigma equals tagism," an anagram to attract attention. And the poster focused on this idea of shame, that stigma is a mark of disgrace. There I am, a mental health service user, sitting in the waiting room looking at a poster telling me about shame. And look on Google Images, do a search for stigma poster, and this perpetual shame promotion is writ large 20 years after I sat in that waiting room. Stigma promotion is an industry showing no signs of abating despite the fact that anti-stigma campaigns usually don't work anyway. In early Christian thought, disease and illness became associated with the mark of shame, with disgrace, with the devil. Stigma is the shortened form of the word stigmata. Stigmata are the wounds of Christ suffered on the cross for our sins. You were believed to be sick because you were a sinner, hence the disgrace and shame. Today, hundreds of years later, the notion of stigma and shame is still widely peddled. Governments fund organisations to promote shame through anti-stigma campaigns. Yet the unintended consequence of anti-stigma campaigns is actually an increase in discrimination, an increased desire for social distance from people who have a diagnosis of mental illness. The most discriminatory term directed at people experiencing mental distress is the term stigma itself. Anti-stigma campaigns and anti-discrimination campaigns are two different constructs with radically different approaches. The first promotes the idea of shame and then argues that shame needs to be reduced, whilst the second tries to defeat unfair treatment and discrimination through a range of legal and other mechanisms. It makes no sense to continue using the term stigma as a fundamental platform for addressing discrimination. This is as illogical as putting a burnt hand under a hot tap in the hope this reduces inflammation and swelling, and then blaming the person for their wounds not healing because they feel pain. There are serious problems with continuing to promote shame and disgrace. The first problem is that people associate stigma with the person who is experiencing stigma. They feel shame. They are ashamed. They feel like second-class or third-class citizens, and so on. In doing so, we make the problem the person and their shame, and we think that we need to therefore have anti-stigma campaigns to reduce stigma and shame felt by people living with the diagnosis. In doing so, we steer away from the root problem, which is the act of discrimination, the act of unfair treatment. You can't defeat discrimination by promoting shame. Anti-discrimination campaigns have the focus on the act of discrimination itself and therefore don't locate the problem with the person being discriminated against, but rather the problem is with the discriminators. Changing the language that we use does matter. The term lunatic was dropped out of the mental health system lexicon years ago, a term far less toxic than the term stigma. So it is possible, and it has been done before. It was inappropriate to perpetuate the notion through the official term lunatic or dangerous lunatic that people were moonstruck as an explanation of their madness. Discrimination is an issue that needs to be addressed, and a starting strategy is through changing the language of stigma, shame and disgrace used widely in mental health, and it isn't even hard to do. Instead of talking about internalized stigma or internalized shame, let us talk about internalized discrimination. Why is this distinction important? Because if we emphasize the fact of a discriminatory act, we locate the problem where it belongs, with the discriminators and with their often unlawful actions, rather than with the person who experiences shame. Whilst ever stigma is the focus, we will never succeed in being effective in combating discrimination. Stigma is a con. It is time to stop using the term stigma completely. Let's deal with the real issue, which is discrimination in all its forms and the consequences of this discrimination, which extend far more broadly than a notion of shame. Let's talk about direct discrimination, indirect discrimination, unlawful discrimination, unfair treatment. Let's call it what it is and take action to stop it now. Thanks for watching, and please don't forget to subscribe and to like this video. Your support is important and it really helps. Subscribing is free. Bye.